All right. First of all, I'd like to welcome you to the City Forest Park and to our senior center. My name is Wright Gwynn. I'm the environmental program manager for the city. This is our 7th presentations by Carol. We decided, she came, I think, didn't you come to me and say, let's do something? I think 2 years ago.
Well, yes, and then COVID hit, and so everything got put on the back burner. But
right.
we got caught up now.
Right. So for 2 years, the first year, last year, we did 4. And the 4 that we did was coyotes in our neighborhoods. That was a great one to start off with. Using native plants in your landscape. Whose yard is it? Backyard wildlife issues. And then befuddled by birds. That was all last year. Okay. This year, we've done good bugs and not so good bugs. Ohio native plants, medicinally speaking. And tonight, it's going to be Nature Did It First. Now, all these are on my webpage. So if you go to my webpage and you're interested in one of these topics, just go to my video collection. Just scroll down, you'll see the environmental seminar heading, and just go down and pick whatever you want to do, and you can view it at your own leisure. Okay? Now, for those who might need this, the restrooms are down and to the right. That's very important. And after Carol gives a presentation, then there will be a question and answer period. All you have to do is raise your hand, and if you've got a question, Carol will repeat it, and she will answer it, and it'll be fine. And then we'll do the raffle prizes. Okay? Any questions? I recognize a lot of the faces here, so thank you for coming. All right, so for those who don't know Carol, let me introduce her. She's an old friend of mine. Well, I shouldn't say old.
It's all right. It's in context.
She is a great friend of mine. She is the founder of The Crow Knows. It's her program, her organization, nonprofit, right?
It's an educational consulting business.
An educational consulting business. And she has been a naturalist, a speaker, and a writer who has taught at the University of Cincinnati and Hamilton County Park District, leading classes on urban wildlife issues, native plants, weed identification, and the historical use of plants. That covers a pretty broad brush. One of her favorite botanical projects was the design of a medicinal display at the Ohio Governor's Residence Heritage Garden and Lloyd's Medicinal Garden in Columbus, Ohio, right?
Right.
She is the recipient of the Citation for Horticulture Education from the Garden Club of Ohio. She continues to offer lectures, workshops in her so-called retirement, teaching informally to many groups. She is a longtime host of a weekly radio show, Outdoor Life, on WMKV Radio here in Cincinnati, and the show features unique topics and interviews tying together nature, science, art, and culture. So she's got her hands in almost everything, and she is a great resource. So after you hear this, really hit her with questions.
Yeah, that's right.
I want to see her sweat. Okay? So right now, I say it's all yours.
Thank you. Thanks for coming back out. We got a lot of return, like he said, returning visitors. You're earning your education badge, I guess, by coming to the lecture. This topic tonight, Wright and I had been cooking this up for years. He really wanted something to talk about the way nature-inspired inventions that we use. So that's what we're going to go through tonight. And it's a lot of fun, and we could be talking about it for years because there's just so much. Everything just rolls into one more. Now, I narrowed it down to about 3 hours. No. And there's not a test, so you're fine. But just think about this. Every culture on the planet in every time period has some of the very same things in their daily life. Pottery, cooking tools, baskets and mats, hunting tools, weapons, the use of fire, of course, the way clothing was made, hides for all kinds of things, shoes and shelter, ropes and cordage from plants, Food and bread, we could talk the whole evening about food and bread, one of my favorite topics. A way to mark time, paper making and writing utensils, medicines from plants and minerals and animals, the noodle, another one of my favorite topics, as in the type that you eat, alcoholic beverages in every culture on the planet. And so it's really interesting when you start comparing things and where those inventions came from and how we still use many of the same thing today. So we're going to go through some of these, and I'm sure you're going to recognize them. Now, I want you to pay close attention to the cheetah here. That will come up later, but we'll see if you're paying attention. So did you ever wonder where the idea for Velcro or suction cups or self-cleaning armor, I'm sure that's hot on your list, solar panels and paper, where did these ideas come from? You might be surprised how we borrow from nature. Somebody gets inspired. And that's what it is. It is the power of imagination that moves us to inspiration. What's the other saying? Necessity is a mother of invention? Right. How many times have you figured out something that you need with something that you already had and made it work? Right. We call that MacGyvering at our house. So nature did it first. So often we are borrowing these items, and we look at the way we've been inspired to create tools, methods, and inventions that you use every day. Pay attention to the cat eyes. It's coming up too. So let's look at some of those inspirations. Humans have been dreaming about flying since time began. Go way back to the Greek story of Icarus when he and his father built wings to fly to escape a person, basically a prison, and they built wings that they covered with bird feathers and beeswax. And when they made it out, Icarus was so excited he kept going higher and higher, and his father said, "Don't go too close to the sun, the wax will melt," and it did. Then we go into like the 15th century, and Da Vinci is drawing these flying machines. He even had one that was a rotor shape that looks a lot like the way a helicopter worked. This is the 15th century. Moving on to the Wright brothers, and they're not the only people who were working on flight. We just happen to know that name. And then forward into modern flight engineers. So here you have these, F-16s and that F-17 there. Those didn't really start to be in the air until the 1970s. And we just keep going farther and faster and faster and farther. It did kind of crack me up when the shuttle came down over the weekend. After all of that technology, what did they drift back down to Earth with? Parachutes. How about this? A zipper is slightly based on the way that a feather works. When you see a bird that flies, not all birds fly, you know that, they are constantly preening and working on their feathers because they are zipping them up. They come undone and they're working on those and they're bringing them back together. So if you have a feather and it's all broken up, that's not going to be very good for flight. So they're constantly working and working and working and working and working to replace that or repair that. And the barbills, so you have these little tiny bits of feather, and on each feather piece, then there's all these tiny little hooks, and it's a lot like the way a zipper works. Now I brought a metal zipper in because it's much more obvious. Nylon zippers, come on, they always break anyway. But these good metal zippers, when you zip them up, what do? They fill in all of the gaps and bring those two materials together. And that design has not really changed since it came about. So you're using that every day. So maybe you can thank a bird. I don't know about that. Okay, here's the cat's eye. I don't know about you, but me and my neighbors often see shiny eyes in the back because we're over there kind of near the dam. There's a lot of dark area behind our house. And if you go out with your flashlight, of course, guess what? You've got this big glowing looking back at you. Well, the idea of the way that came about, the idea of using that is nighttime animals, cats especially, have a very special piece of tissue called the tympanium. And when light is shined into that, it redirects it to the photocells and really brightens their field of vision. It doesn't blind them like it does us. I'm sure if you're driving at night, especially anymore, you get a bright light and you feel like you can't see for quite a long time. Or you go to the eye doctor. That just happened to me. And then they're saying, okay, you can go home now. I can't see to go home. But because they have these very different types of tissues in their eyes that we don't, that's light shine. And so in England, about 1930s, they were working on how to put that to use. And they actually invented what they called the cat's eye road reflector. It sat in that metal boot. So they poured this metal boot. This piece with the two eyeballs kind of looks more like something out of Star Wars, looking back at you there. But those had a very special type of prism. And in fact, today, in our more expensive flashlights, we have a very similar prism. And what that does is it allows you to give more light with less energy. So you have a good beam of light. You might remember the flashlights you had growing up that they look like a aluminum funnel on the inside with one tiny light bulb. They didn't do much. But the idea that this could be installed into the road, it doesn't give off any light, it only redirects when light hits it. And so now we have all of these on our roadways that light up like those cat's eyes. And in some places they're still designed like that. But you might have other things. So safety wear, you think about that reflective tape that's on construction workers or people out walking or jogging at night. The reflectors that you might put by the side of the road. Now they don't have that prism, but they have tiny little facets. So when the light hits that, it breaks it up and makes it shine. No light on its own. And then lots of tape that you can use has that. So it's kind of like a mirror. When the light hits the cat's eye, that tympanium, it is pushing that light back out again. Let's move on to something else. We've got lots of up here. There's lots of paper on the table. I'm addicted to paper. I write things down. I make lots of notes, as you might be able to tell. That idea has been around, and sometimes it's been made from plant fibers, where they took the plant, they got it wet, they boiled it, they mashed it, they spread it out, and they made the slurry, and then they pulled it up on a screen to make paper. But insects such as hornets were paper makers before humans ever did. They will go and chew. Here's a lady. No offense, guys, but the ladies are doing all the work here. The ladies go out and they chew that wood that could be a tree in your yard. It could be the fence post. It could be your decking. And it's really amazing to watch those mouth parts work. Then they're mixing it with the saliva in their mouth. And this is what would be, let's go back a minute. So I'm sure you've seen some of these, and as leaves are falling down, you'll find them about the size of a basketball. That is one season's work. All the females were creating that. They're not going to be in there over the winter, but don't bring it in the house unless it's treated or really put into the deep freeze, because there could be a few still waiting. But if you look at those really beautiful marbling effects, humans, paper makers like my friend, they work many hours to try and get a similar effect. Maybe the special ingredient is hornet spit, I don't know. But think about something that's the size of the basketball, how long it took to make that. And the amount, I mean, their mouths are tiny. So they chew a bit, they add the saliva, they go back and they put that paper down and go and do it 1,000, 100,000, 1,000,000 times before they create that dome. But on the inside, all right. Yep, there we go. Now you have these layers, these chambers, as they go in. There's a couple of them here. Here's the inside of the bald-faced hornet. So it would be hanging up like that and then completely covered with that sheath. There's some of the loose paper if you want to have a look at that. And then this is the yellow jacket or ground hornet that you would be finding underneath the ground. They're going to use the mole hole, the chipmunk hole, and they're not happy when you run over that hole with the lawnmower. They're the ones that come and mess up your party outside because they're eating the fruit and the meat at the end of the year. But think about that. So paper makers here before we figured that part out. The brown paper wasp, she makes a very small nest. Not a whole lot of young in that. They're about the size of a golf ball. There's the ground hornet, and of course here's the bald-faced hornet, which now has a new its new name is aerial yellow jacket. They didn't like bald-faced hornet, I don't know. But you will find these right now, they're going to be pulled out of that hole because the skunk is pulling them out and eating the larva and the pupa. They're doing you a favor by killing them off and eating the larva and the pupa. Continuing on that same line, still a girls' club, we have other wasps that are potters. They're collecting mud one tiny little ball at a time. I mean, I can't even describe to you the size of the ball of the mud that they're collecting. They fly back, and using their mouth to form that arch shape, they make these what looks like pipe organs, the tubes, the chambers on the pipe organ. And within each of those, at the very top, they put one egg and an immobilized spider, seal it off, and just keep doing that. So there is an immobilized spider, about 6 spiders in there, each with one egg, and they just let the larva come to life out of the egg and eat that spider, and on they go. Now, once in a while, you might have that potter's wasp get into the chamber on your door. I don't know why. I mean, I live next to the woods. There's lots of things where they could be, but they want to be in that chamber on the top of my screen door or storm door. And it's not very pleasant to, burst through there and have some of the blue paper wasps. They're not likely to sting, but I don't want to take a chance. But if you look at the shape of this, here's what the little pot looks like. And especially if you live with a stone or a brick house, I would encourage you to go and look around. You might find these lovely little pots, and they look so much like a Japanese sake, a Japanese rice wine bottle. So you can see that a lot of those similarities might have been inspired by things that insects were making. I had another little pot over here. This is a same similar shape, but this is actually a lamp, an oil lamp that would have been used in the early 1800s. So filled with oil, here's the wick that goes on in there. And then they light the top of it, but you can see it has that same shape as that potter's wasp. The artistry of silk, everybody knows about silk. I think they probably do. But do you realize that it is based on the life of an insect? The artistry of silk, the art and beautiful, elegant silk starts with lots and lots of caterpillars. If there weren't caterpillars eating things like mulberry, there would be no silk. Caterpillars have been farmed in many parts of Asia. So the Japanese, the Chinese, the people of the islands in India, they found that this moth right here, that's the silkworm moth, produces a lot of eggs. Then there's lots of hungry caterpillars. Sounds like a story we know. They get lots and lots and lots of mulberry leaves. That's what they're doing over here in this shelter. They are feeding all of those hungry caterpillars. It's not one of those one and done. You are feeding thousands and thousands and thousands of leaves. After they get a little bigger, they're put into baskets and they go into a cocoon. I think I have a cocoon in the next one. There we go. Here's a cocoon down. And so here, this isn't from the silkworm from China or Japan, but this is a native silkworm moth that we have here in Ohio. This is from a Polyphemus. And you could do the same thing. It's just that they don't produce as many young as what we were watching. So they collect these cocoons. That pupa is in the inside. They boil them. That's what the lady is doing here. She's been boiling the cocoons. Then she has them in a shallow, warm water, and she's starting to undo the thread. There's about 1,000 feet of silk fiber in each cocoon that's about 3 inches or less. 1,000 feet. Now that's just one cocoon. So then they get those pulled out. They start getting those fibers. Think about a spinning wheel or a drop spindle to get those fibers moved into a twisted yarn or a twisted thread. Then they're going on to a loom and they're creating the cloth, and then they're being made into all kinds of fabric. And there's a couple of pieces of silk up here. Silk thread, of course. The picture up above here, this picture really spoke to me because my mother was an appraiser for Asian art, and we had these in our house. This is a silk iron. So once the ladies had gotten the cloth the way they wanted it, they smoothed it out, they're inspecting it. In fact, this was for the emperor, I believe that's 12th century, it's on there. But they would put embers in this brass bowl and then rub it across that silk to smooth it out. Didn't you ever wonder how all of those beautiful garments stayed the way they looked in the books? No. Okay, here comes the math, get ready. I'm not trying to hypnotize you, I promise. There is the golden sequence, this beautiful spiral that happens in nature. And once Fibonacci figured this out, the math works out such that, and it's not even in 1 inch or 1 centimeter or 1 micron. It is 1 unit. Whatever measure, it is 1 unit. And what he figured out was, starting here in the very center, he started with 0. Then there was 1 added to that. That's a 1. Then 1 and 1 is 2, and you can see how it moves up from that. And that spiral happens in nature and in us. It's amazing. Once you start to understand what it looks like, you're going to see it everywhere. It's a whole different perspective. In the sunflowers, like the ones on the table, as they start to mature and the seeds are there, and even when the petals unfurl, it is following that same spiral influence. As a nautilus or a snail makes its shell, it follows that same sequence. Here's a little tendril. You could look at a tendril on a bean plant. You could look at a frond on a fern plant. And they're all following that same sequence. This is in a church. We'll see that here in a minute. Yep. That's the inside. If you go into this cathedral in Dallas and you look up, that's what you're going to be seeing. That's all stained glass. Gives you a completely different perspective. But you think about that humans can build a spiral that will be sustained. There aren't supports in the center that hold that up. And then in our own bodies. So if you put your thumb down and curl your hand, you've got that same sequence going on. The measurement of your finger is in that same sequence. Unless you're missing a bone in your finger, you've got that same sequence. So many of those are there. That's why I wanted to include the sunflowers in here tonight. Have you ever heard of the Lotus Effect? The Lotus Effect talks about the way that this particular plant, the way that it grows, it is self-cleaning. And the way that it is following that Fibonacci number, it always releases, the water is dripped on, and it always goes in the same direction. You can turn it around, turn it upside down. You can take it to the south, beyond our equator. It doesn't move the other direction. It always spins in the same spiral. And with that self-cleaning, it allows for any dirt and trapped soil on there to go into the center. And then when there's enough moisture, it tips over. Now, why is that important? Because we have learned to harvest that or harness that in some of the new materials. When you look at people in the military, they're out and about. It's not like they're going to wash their clothes once a week, once a month, once a year. And so the idea is, can the personnel get some clothing that has some type of a finish that is very similar to the way the lotus, if we were to put that under the microscope, you would be able to see these strange little bumps that funnel those bits of moisture and soil to the center, and then they rinse off. And that leaf remains dry. So after that happens, the leaf remains dry. And I have a couple of lotus leaves here. They're kind of past their prime, but you can certainly see them. How many times have you been somewhere where they had a make a donation wishing well? I think I got that on there. Yep. So here's that wishing well. When you drop in your coins, they will always go in the same direction. Even if you try and start them in some other way, they will always go in that same direction. Well, that is being copied in many other places. And here is a German company in '99 that was able to recreate Now it doesn't have that same spiral going on, but it has a very similar texture that's on the lotus plant. So basically it's self-cleaning. Just think about what that would save in terms of maintenance on a building where it has that type of paint where as the water moves across it, it is taking the soil, dirt, and whatever else with it. Okay, do not try this at home. Don't you wonder what somebody was thinking when they decided they'd climb a 7 or 8-story building? Wonder how far he got before he got in trouble. Yes, Spider-Man comes to mind, but I don't know if I would trust that. All right, well, let's look at suction cups and other sticky situations. So the way a suction cup works is that interesting little rubber was originally rubber. Maybe you grew up, I'm sure there's people in here who grew up and they had bows and arrows with real rubber discs on them. Hopefully you weren't like my brother who removed the rubber disc and put it in the pencil sharpener. So you have that little lovely dome, and there's 3 different stages to it. And as it is, there has to be a little bit of moisture. It could be a little bit of water. If you were to put a little bit of like skin oil on that, it makes a very tight seal. And so that's how the suction cup works. We've got them in bird feeders. You can put that on the outside of the window. Generally, it holds up pretty good. Of course, things like tree frogs have that type of development as well. But I will tell you that suction cups are really going out of favor for day-to-day use because now we have all of this 3M technology where you have that piece that sticks. It doesn't leave a mark. You hang your hook. You can hang your wind chime or whatever it was, and then you pull it back off. So we're kind of moving away from that a little bit. However, we're going to take that to another level. If you look at the way the inspiration for these suction cups came about, you think about things like squid and octopus and the discs that they have on their arms. They're not calling them tentacles anymore, they're calling them arms. And each one of those has a pressure-sensitive, I don't know what else to call it, brain, if you will, that goes back and tells when it needs to add more pressure or release pressure so that it can hold on to something and pull it close to him or push it away. And now humans are trying to copy that. So here is a working prototype of an octopus arm, complete with sensor pressurative discs, sucker discs on there. And the idea that they can get it to pick up a ball. Here's one holding an egg. There's your coffee cup. I'd like to see that. Hold your cup of coffee. And so that one's one of the ways mechanical engineers and now computer scientists and so on get together to figure that out. When you look at these fellows and the way that those suckers work, there are so many different types within each arm, hundreds on each arm, and each one has a different means of pressure. And to be able to process that so quickly, probably way more than our brains can do. There's another type of octopus. You can kind of see this guy up here. It looks like he's got a ruffly dress on. And what these fellows have gotten to do is they've worked together to create this prototype that has this very soft film. So they had to work with a chemist because it could not be sticky like a glue. It had to be very pliable. It had to work underneath water, of course. And then the sucker discs with all the different pressure points that they could go and completely surround something, kind of like they're doing to the turtle. And then it would enclose that in that soft, maybe silicone or whatever polymaterial it is. The stickers hold it and they bring it back up to the surface. I know it sounds like something you read about in Jules Verne, and here we are. How about your windshield? If it wasn't for suction cups, your windshield wouldn't be in the spot that it needs to be. Think about moving the glass panels in a building. The size of the panels of glass, even something like this. If that was one big panel, it's pretty heavy for a couple of people to move. But when you're looking at these gigantic buildings and these super thick panes of glass that weigh probably thousands of pounds, so they're letting the machine do the work with these giant suction cups. They can pick it up where it was delivered. The suction cups are holding on, and they're moving that over to the location they need to install it. then the suction cups hold it where it needs to be before the humans come in and finish that. And you have a lot less tired people than trying to hold that all the time. But the technology, you can have the windshield guy come out to your house now or where you're working, and in a matter of about a half an hour or so, take the old one out and the new one is in, thanks to suction cups. There's a few other sticky situations out there, and this one's really unique because it does not hurt the shark. So this fish called the remora, he's down in the Keys, he's around Hawaii, he's in some other warm places. And he's just hanging on to the shark. Basically, that's the metro. They hang on to the shark, they're not cleaning him, they're not eating him, they're not making any kind of mark, but these sucker discs, with the pressure that's there, hang on while the shark is swimming. I mean, that's a lot of force for that sucker to be able to survive. And so the idea behind that stickiness is it's not glue. There's no adhesive. It's this kind of weird rubbery shape. And now they're looking at it for all kinds of things. You might have something like that. See how sticky this one is? So you have this kind of material. It has kind of a diamond shape. One side is a little more tacky than the other. You can use it again and again. Just wash it off, let it dry. It will pick up every little piece of lint in the meantime. And then put it on there. It's pretty good. They were sold originally to like hold your phone on the dashboard. They're not quite that strong. But the idea that is sticky without any kind of adhesion and leaves no mark. And that's part of the reason they're looking at that for a medical reason. If they can reduce that disc and still cover human skin, especially fragile skin, so somebody who is going through a cancer treatment, maybe they're at advanced age, and they have to have an IV or a port or something, and to be able to cover that, or a burn area, that allows that to still do what it needs to do. It's not trapping the bacteria on the inside, and when they're pulling it off, it's not sticky like I just showed you. It comes off and leaves no mark. There are so many people who are allergies to the type of paper tape or rubber tape or whatever it is that you're using, and especially for people who are in advanced age, they have that paper thin skin. So here's one way that we got an idea from the remora fish. Maybe we can recreate those kinds of suckers that are there. They're not like the disc on an octopus, but it could help in cases with fragile skin. Another sticky situation, so here's our favorite gecko, pretty neat little guys. Now when you look at their foot, there's no sucker, you don't see any discs. What you're looking at is many, 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 many folded layers, and up underneath, this is a scanning electron microscope. It almost is like tiny little tubes. They're made of chitin. Now chitin in you is your hair and your fingernails. On the gecko, it's very pliable. It's more fleshy. And it actually looks a lot like, this is the synthetic version, like little nanotubes, perhaps of silicone. But it allows for that gecko to feel it and add or reduce the pressure to move and stay on, or to be able to put his foot up and just walk off of there. And so now they're looking at that with the idea that now you have an adhesive surface that has no glue, no terrible chemicals, no residue, and no harm to the skin of the surface that they're using it on. There is a robotics lab where they have built a gecko with these artificial setae, these hair-like tubules, and you see it walking up the wall. It's a little creepy. Some other things that those gecko feet have inspired. So maybe you have a pair of glasses and it's always slipping down. You've got the nose bits right there. They have made tiny little pads shaped like that gecko feet that are tacky but not sticky. There's not going to be any residue or glue on your skin. And so you can put those on your glasses. They also have, this is a reusable weather seal, so that you can pull it back off and place it again, and it has some of those very similar types of hair-like tubules so that you can use it again and again. Now we're going to be talking about your melon. So sonar specialists, dolphins emit a very high-pitched click. Not everybody can hear that. Some of us can. And through those sounds, it's amplified in this tissue called the melon. I thought that was a great name for it. It's a very fatty gland right in the top of their head, and that's part of the reason they have this super big forehead. I mean, it is quite a hump right there. But when they put out those clicks, it amplifies it, so that sound goes really far away. When it bounces back, because it's hit an animal, an object, a predator, it comes back and he gets that signal in his jawbone. And his brain is interpreting, okay, that's a school of fish. Oop, that's an orca, I gotta get out of here. Oh, it's a submarine. I don't know if he says that to himself, but you get the idea. But that's one of the ways that we took that and started working in this, kind of like an echolocation that we use. And so here we have some products that you might have already used. In the late 1990s and into the 2000s, first we had, these are military originally, the jawbone microphone. You had a tiny piece across your ear, it came to here. You see that a lot in music concerts now where they have that tiny little piece that comes to here. It's not even in front of their mouth. It's usually like right in here. So they were using that, and then they got rid of the wire, and they went to these headsets. But here's the newest one. Can you imagine being fit for a molar microphone? It fits right up in there like a bridge work you would have in your mouth. You don't need the microphone, and you don't need an amplifier. So it picks up you speaking, and you're hearing it. You're using your jawbone to receive those messages through that molar mic. Just don't eat, like hard candy or where you're having it. But again, fast forward, now we have these kinds of devices. I mean, pretty much every day, everywhere you go, they have the little earbuds or bits in. And that was the original way it started with sonar from the Dolphins and moved up. Of course, the military is always the ones to seem to try that, and then it trickles down. Think of all the things the astronauts had on their trips around the sun, if you would, and that we are using today. So they tried it with these folks first, and then they tapped it back so it was something that the general public could use. We have other ways of creating that echolocation similar to sonar. So you have the big brown bat, which big is like 9 inches, just so you're not afraid. He's here in Ohio. All of Ohio bats are insect eaters. There are no vampire bats native to Ohio. So he's flying around and he's putting out these little high frequency sounds. And if it hits the moth, that sound comes back to him, and it is interpreted to say, go to the right 15 feet, or whatever the case might be. So you have that situation where the sound is going out, but then the moth does some of this crazy stuff, or they'll drop out of the sky to evade being eaten by that hungry bat. Now you and I cannot hear those sounds. So they have designed what's called a bat detector, and they're so cool the way they work. They're not much bigger than your cell phone anymore. I think there's probably an app for that too. But you can put that out. You may not hear the bats flying around. You turn that to the sound waves that are specific to that bat sound. Somebody else has recorded it. And if it picks it up, it slows it down. So now you hear click, 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 click. And after you do it a few times, it's a lot like listening to bird sounds. Your brain will start to differentiate. Oh, that's a big brown. Oh, that's a little brown. Oh, that's the eastern pipistrelle, or whatever the case might be. But it's so incredible that you can do that, and they're not expensive anymore. When I worked for parks, if you wanted one, they were $300 to $500. Now they're under $100. I think that's pretty interesting we brought that. Wind turbines, as these blades were being designed, they create a lot of turbulence and they make a lot of noise when they're doing that. So they thought about the feathered edge or the serrated edge on an owl feather. And you can come up and see those when we're done. But on the edge of that feather, it's serrated. So instead of being straight across, like this guy is, that's from a turkey, he doesn't care if he makes noise. He's just looking for corn. It's not going to run away. But if you're an owl and you're flying at night, you're looking for a mouse, and if you make too much noise, then the mouse runs away. So they thought maybe if they put a serrated edge on those blades, they would be able to reduce the turbulence behind it and the sound. And so that's what they did. I would have loved to have been in the room when the person went into the engineers and said, I've been looking at this owl feather, and I think we should redesign, re-engineer those blades. So that serrated edge, you can kind of see it right here. It looks like little teeth, kind of like on a comb. Even though that feather is completely intact, it's all zipped up, it has that little edge, and that keeps that sound. You don't hear that flight noise like when a duck or a dove takes off. That's going on. So it's reducing that sound and turbulence. Okay, so here's that dark stripe. Even the world's fastest land animal needs a little sunblock once in a while. So that malar stripe that goes down the front face, some people thought it looked like, black tears had rolled out of his eyes. That's a lot like what our athletes try and use by putting that black mark underneath. It reduces the glare in bright conditions. And I tried to ask some people I know that might play baseball or football how that works for them, and I get mixed reviews. There is the stick that's like a wax pencil. You can put that on, and then there's these stickers. And of course, you've seen them on every football game. Sometimes they have designs. Sometimes they're not even black, and I'm thinking, well, then why are you bothering? If you make it white, it's going to put the sun back up towards your eye. But thanks to the cheetah, we now have a way to help reduce that glare. Most humans do not have a big, brawny brow that sticks out, unless you happen to maybe be a Neanderthal or a Cro-Magnon with that big, heavy, bony brow. But a lot of animals that are hunting, especially in the daylight, need that brow. I mean, that's what this is, when we put our hand up to do that, that's exactly the same thing. So here's a Peregrine Falcon, which we have here in Ohio. They have that extra bony brow. And if you ever were to look at the skeleton, it would be really obvious how much that bone sticks out. And so we borrowed that idea, of course, by making the sun hat, both for military purposes, son-in-laws with grandsons at the baseball game, and a flying pig. And of course, for our fuzzy friends, sometimes they need a little help too. But that's a pretty simple one. Let's talk about solar panels and butterfly wings. Solar panels are not flat. Despite the way they look on the house or wherever you happen to see them, they are not flat. Butterfly wings are not flat, and butterfly scales are not flat. And the reason for that is all of these little hills and valleys, see the ridges and the valleys? Think about if you were to pleat a piece of paper like you would make a paper fan. You have reduced the amount of space that fan takes up because you folded it, but there's still all of these areas where light or liquid or whatever can get to it. So that's what's happening here. So here's the butterfly wing. Again, this is under the scanning electron microscope. A micron, this little notation here, it's a funny, like a backward U with an M, that's 1/1,000,000th of a millimeter. 1,000,000. That's what that electron microscope can see. And it's just seeing the surface. It's not looking through. It's just measuring over the surface. So we have all of these little ridges and valleys, which means that butterfly wing is one of the best solar arrays. They can't fly if they're not warm. Same thing with birds. They can't fly until their muscles warm up. Butterflies need that solar energy, that solar heat to be able to warm their muscles, if you will, so they can fly as well. And so I love that they have these newer solar panels that actually look like shingles to put on your house, but they also look like the scales on butterfly wings. And so the idea that it's just this flat, glassy panel, you have to look into it to see how it's been constructed to collect as much solar energy as it possibly can. Here's another kind of a sticky situation. And boy, did they get you. How many times have you been out with your own dog or your cat or your own self? I was out yesterday, I had a thicker sweater on. I walked through one little patch of weeds and I must have had 300 on one sleeve. So here we have, this is burdock. It's even sticking to the tablecloth. This is burdock, a little different than cockle burr. And if you were to look at it underneath the microscope, you would see the tiny little hooks. And this fellow, the Swiss engineer, decided, I want to see what we can do with that. They have to think about that time frame, 1941. That plastics were not really coming around into common use at that point in terms of for everyday use. But where am I going with this? What is the product that was made from hooks and fasteners? You know it. You got it. Everybody knows that sound. Now it's on all of your shoes. I do kind of wonder when they put it on your camo gear, if you're out in the woods and you're trying to be quiet and you have that sound. I think that's one of the sounds that identify us in a different era because everybody happens to know that sound. But now they have them, they're so strong they can hold a television on a wall. You can use them for holding up pictures onto the wall. But the idea that having your dog completely covered with these cockle burrs, and you can actually see them, if you decide to pick this up, please be very careful. How about if you pick it up like this? Because they will stick to your skin, they'll get in your hair, they're sticking to the table here. But the idea for that hook and loop fastener is now everywhere. And of course it's spread way out. There's many more things that don't go by the name of Velcro that work that way. And that's pretty amazing. It's no fun to try and get those out of your dog's fur for sure. For sure. That's right, I needed that laugh. So this is what burdock looks like. Burdock is not native to the United States. It was brought over around the 1600s, supposedly by accident, but it was used for food or medicine. It can get up about, 4 or 5 feet tall. One of the ways to know it is that it has this tiny little pink flower there towards the end of the summer. And all of those burrs are very, very round up towards the top of the plant. Now that doesn't, we are not even talking about all the other little stick tights. And here's what I pulled off my sweater. So you can see those are the little triangular shape pads. But that's nature's way of using you to transport the seed to someplace else. We kind of turned the tables by making our own hooks and loops to create that. As we're using some of these inspirations and you move through your everyday life, I hope that you have a chance to think about where the inspiration might have come from. And I want to close by reminding that we are part of nature. We're utilizing it, but we should be side by side. We are partners. We're part of this. So the proper way to use science is not to conquer nature, but to live with it. This is a lesser prairie chicken. He's out in Kansas. My husband was out there photographing them with some people from OSU. And some of the areas where these fine birds dance and puff up are, of course, disappearing. Our children and our grandchildren might have a chance to see this guy. But look at how his headdress is. You go back and look at some of the indigenous people of the plains and you look at some of their dance outfits. They were mimicking prairie chickens. Okay, so nature did it first. We're going to continue to do that throughout our lives. I want you to go home and study that Fibonacci sequence. Maybe you could go to the Fibonacci brewery and have a little drink to celebrate the Fibonacci sequence. I hope this has been a little bit fun for you, but you've learned something new. So we can go ahead and ask questions if you might happen to have those. Oh, I stumped everybody. No questions? I can't believe it. Right, well, we can stretch our legs. You can come up and look at what's on the table, and then Wright and I can do some drawings for the door prizes. Yep, thank you.
Instead of like having an app,
We had a
take
little
a picture and send it. What is this?
Yeah.